First off, just a few acknowledgements. Obviously, to thank the Lipitz Foundation for their award, and Dean Jeffries and all the other deans at the college in helping me with further my grant and my own personal work. I'd like to also thank the IRC, the Image Research Center, and Dan Bailey's director, and the associate director, Lee Boot, for their contributions to my research as well. The support of my department, the current chair, and also to mention the former chair, Frank Nunakwarka, who also nominated me for this award. And the Kuhn Library for hosting this event. I specifically wanted to do it here, not only because I like the space and I like to support the library gallery as well as special collections, but special collections actually plays a little bit of a role in the high-def production that you're going to see here at the end. Work in progress, but nevertheless, something reasonable to look at. Okay, so this is the Lipitz lecture, and most of what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon are elements of things that I'm working on while being the Lipitz professor. There will be a few other side issues that we're going to talk about here. So the first thing that you should know is that as a media artist in a former life, I used to say that I was a video artist, the old days. And as the dean mentioned, one of the aspects of the Lipitz for me is conveying my entire work from the 1970s, which is now frozen on reel-to-reel videotape, to the J. Paul Getty Museum and the Getty Research Center in Los Angeles, where they have offered to undertake its restoration and eventual archiving of whatever survives from that work. For those of us who remember the good old days of the early video era, most of these works do not exist in their original form anymore, meaning they don't exist as reel-to-reel, half-inch reel-to-reel technology. The sort of seminal event here is in the mid-60s when such little-known corporations as Panasonic and Sony invented the Poetic and brought the multi-million-dollar industry of television to the populace by producing what was called the Poetic for a very reasonable amount of money and putting into the hands of artists for the first time the ability to make television as recorded media. And so we all jumped in 2 feet, and the first sort of 10 years of my work was recorded on half-inch reel-to-reel. And that was edited, for those of you who remember, from one deck to another, and with a grease pencil. So you used to, it's like incredibly primitive for the electronic age, but you would have, 2 decks hooked together, and you would have your reel-to-reel deck going, and you would take a grease pencil and mark a spot on the tape, literally on the tape, and then you would back roll the video roughly 10 seconds so that you could count down towards the X, which is what I used to mark mine, as X marks the spot. And you'd have your head down here, watching the lines go by, and then pow, you'd hit the button and hope that you got the edit in the appropriate place, because it was all a matter of timing. As a matter of fact, editing was performance in that sense. You really sort of got psyched up to do the edit because it required you really focusing on both visual and acoustical information, in order to get that right. And I was pretty good at it. You know, I got pretty good at it over time, and very pleased about that. So the question that they always asked in those early days was, how long will video last? I mean, you know, the medium. And we'd all go, don't know. Well, the don't know actually turned out to be a pretty short period of time. Somewhere around the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, everybody who worked in reel-to-reel technology began to realize my material's not playing very well, and then it wouldn't play at all. Because what was happening was the glue that they used on the polymer tape to adhere the iron oxide to the tape began to stick together. And so what you had were boat anchors, basically, because at a certain point you really couldn't play your work. Now, if you were lucky, and I was mostly lucky, you transferred your original material to other formats. So U-matic cassette was the rave at the time, and actually the longest running format in the history of videotape. And so many of my works did survive, but the first 3 years of my work exists only on these reel-to-reel tapes. I haven't seen them probably in 25 or more years. So not only if I'm lucky, and I emphasize if I'm lucky, the work that the Getty will be restoring will not only provide me with better copies of the works that I have archived myself, because there's a lot of glitches and things like that in these things that just comes with age and everything, but may reveal some things that I haven't seen in a long time. Maybe not the best work, but certainly great memories for me, and maybe, who knows, a hidden thing might be there. I don't know. So that's an ongoing project, and probably will be something that goes on for several years. I'm going to play now just to give you a flavor of that. This image you're looking at, Waterpiece, was one of the tapes that was shown in California Video, which was the Getty exhibition last spring, which the Dean referenced, and also is sort of my foot in the door to getting them to be interested in archiving my work, restoring it and archiving it in the first place. But it's not the work that I'm going to show this afternoon, but from the same era. So let's look at Normal Converse. Normal Converse is a work that was done in '74, and it has features two people, myself and Nina Sobel, who's also a video artist, now multimedia artist. And I'll play a little bit of this. You'll see it's about 4 minutes long.
The 11th sample is a linear predictive coder operating at 2.4 kilobits per second. 0.4 kilobits per second. We were away a year ago. You see, you don't have a sense of the job. The first sample is a pitch-excited channel vocoder operating at 2400 bits per second. Is a pitch-excited channel vocoder operating at 2400 bits per second. The triple one format vocoder operating at 1200 bits per second. This sample is being recorded on a binary delay of 1200 bits per second. To limit all software relating to archivation. The 14th sample is a pitch-excited format vocoder operating at 1200 bits.
So I'm going to keep talking over this. This was really at the dawn of the digital era, and the soundtrack that you're hearing is a plastic, one of the first sort of experiments in digital voice recording that was being done at different data rates, and it was included in an engineering magazine, and you could pull it out and put it on your record player and play it. And so this is the soundtrack. It's a low-budget production. People say, well, who's the camera person? Well, whoever is sitting in the foreground is basically sitting there and zooming in and doing all this, and we're looking at a monitor off screen. So it's, you become ambidextrous pretty quickly. Hopefully, we'll have even better copies of these kinds of works as time goes by. Now, since we're really talking a little bit about poetry and nonlinear stuff here today, even from the very beginning here, I think you can see readily this is not traditional narrative, and the desire to do non-narrative kinds or nonlinear kinds of things was present even in the early days. Very difficult to do because these things, there weren't even projectors back then. The largest that I ever saw this piece for years was about maybe 25 to 30 inches diagonal. So the way that we begin to deal with sort of multi-stream events or the nonlinear kind of process was to do installation work and to do performance work in which there were multiple inputs happening, sometimes live, sometimes pre-recorded, and things like that. This is not one of the Lipitz projects, but it's one that's been going on while I've been a Lipitz professor this year. My wife, Christina Hung, and I were invited to participate in an exhibition in Germany in the North Sea and concerning issues of the Wattenmeer, which is the lowland tidal flats that actually stretch from Denmark all the way around through the Netherlands. And all of the north coast of Germany has elements of the Wattenmeer. And how we were interested in approaching this, what you've got on the top is a panorama view, and thanks to Dan Bailey for helping us stitch that together. And then one of the photographs that we're presenting, which is on the bottom half there, is actually microscopic image that Christina has taken. This is a sample. We took samples of the Watt and were able to then stitch together, a composite of the Wattenmeer at microscopic level, along with an image of the Watt. And it deals with our whole kind of interest in optics. And I guess one thing that I would say, the tyranny of optics. Ever since the camera obscura and the invention of one-point perspective, we've been invested highly in the concept of monocularity, where all of the instruments that have come from that, which includes all our cameras, the video camera included, where we see things from one point of view. And we were interested in kind of trying to break through that dominant form and begin to look at things from another way. Obviously, painting has dealt with this for a long period of time, and I found an interesting article, an ally, I guess, in a kind of a strange place. David Hockney, a painter, photographer, and he has sort of said basically somewhere around 1430, painting also began to take an optical look because people were using the camera obscura to look at what they were seeing And it gave them obvious advantage, and there's been tremendous advantage gained from this. Vermeer is one of the greatest examples of that, where we can see the reduction of three-dimensional space, in such a very coherent way. But if we look carefully at the way that these paintings are constructed, they're constructed, there's actual optical artifacts in there that come from the use of a camera obscura as a device. But it goes much further in the sense that this whole era following this, as we've progressed through technology, is that we've really begun to accept that this is vision. And yet, I think the history of modern painting, and certainly the era that we're in now, is sort of running counter to that and saying, well, wait a minute, maybe there are other things that are going on here. Some kind of other way of looking at the combination of elements of time, emotion, multiple vantage points, sound, the fact that we have two eyes, that we're quite often in a moving context in space, and we put this all together in our lives on a constant, ongoing basis. And that maybe this kind of monocular point of view is limiting how we conceive of vision in the larger sense. Certainly, I think since the beginning of film, there have been people that have tried to sort of go at this challenge. And I'm thinking of Abel Gantz's Polyvision with his famous 1927 film Napoleon, and where he has 3 screens spread out across the opera house in Paris, where he's shooting what was then early panorama. So it predates all the sort of single film optical panoramic visions that we see. But also something else he did, which was very, very important and was not really understood, I think, until our era now, is that not only did he create panoramas, but he had separate images in all 3 screens. So he literally had split the focus from this kind of one channel view into a triple channel view. And that, I think, is very, very modern and really is quite significant. And it's not until we get to the modern era with the aid of the computer that we're able to really sort of begin to take advantage of some of these elements. That period of time, the late 19th century, that fabulous moment when at the end of the 19th century there was this explosion of inventions, all of those recording devices, the phonograph, the telephone, the film, that are things that are so integrated into our lives today that we hardly really think about how important and how earth-shattering they were. But for me, I think the most important of all of those inventions, at least in terms of having to sort of rethink the way we all live our lives, is the wireless. And the reason why I say the wireless is it was invisible in a certain sense, but it was the first time that we had separation of time and space. And just think about now how many things that we all interact with that are separations of time and space for us, and how we have to sort of rethink how we conceive of ourselves and of others and of community based upon this essential separation. Up to that moment in time, if you wanted to see something, you had to go to where it was in order to see it. So therefore, there was always this fusion of time and space. If you wanted to hear an orchestra play, you had to go where the orchestra was playing in order to hear it. If you wanted to see a play, you had to go where the play was in order to experience it. And so suddenly now, we're contending with recorded things, things that skew things in time, things that skew things in space. Obviously, we see this all the time, not only in television, but the internet today has just made it a daily practice for all of us, and we think nothing of it. But in essence, we're really only about, a century and a quarter into grogging what this means to all of us in terms of how we lead our lives, let alone make creative works. Since, I guess, the 1980s, I have been really interested, even while I was making single-channel tapes, which was pretty much all you could do, in sort of multi-channel issues. And I was sort of able to address this in performance. This particular piece, a collaborative piece between Gary Lloyd, Aisha Quinn, and myself, Atari is the New Parent, was an interactive satellite performance from connecting Los Angeles, where Gary Lloyd was, and Aisha Quinn and I, who were at the University of Iowa at that time. And this was a national broadcast of this satellite thing. It's something, it's a teleconference. But basically, we do it all the time. But in those days, this was not only very rare, but also very expensive event. And so the ability to work, and I believe that this is maybe the second such interactive satellite artist event ever constructed within the United States. Also at the same time, I was very much interested in having multi-channel, live multi-channel things. This particular piece, North Station, which was a collaboration with Aisha Quinn as well, from the same period of time, is doing live chroma keying, also with pre-recorded works and live performance. This happens to be at the LA County Museum of Art. And so my interest in these things is long-running, but still held back from doing this kind of thing basically in video, because video was always the sort of stepchild of film in a certain way with regard to resolution and issues of being able to see any kind of clarity that would allow you to have little fragments of things in different places. So this is the work that we're going to see at the end of tonight. The title, or at least the working title, is Archivist, Cleaving Among the Houses. But before we get there, I want to show a little bit of another work, which is an interactive piece here. For those of you that frequent the Visual Arts Department and have seen some of our shows, you may have seen this in the past because it has been exhibited. But this is really, I think for me, my first truly interactive work. This is a director piece from 2000 called Dissolving. And it's, the impetus to do this was, as I think in the arts are common, things that happen in your life, right? And you go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Maybe I'll turn that into something. This particular thing, my parents had moved to the Gulf Coast in Alabama, a place that I had avoided most of my life, during the mid-1990s. And I have relatives that were there, and they were invited there. 2 weeks after arriving, they were hit by Hurricane Opal. They had never been in a hurricane before, and the hurricane took all of our family archives, all of the photography and all of the sort of things that you collect for your family, and just doused them in a good dose of salt water. So I came down, tried to help my parents sort of dig out from this event, and of course I was distraught that the family archives had been completely ruined. I started getting out all my old photo abilities and basically treat them like I was in a lab, and I started washing off everything that I could find that was reasonable, and putting them on a piece of glass and letting them dry and you know, in the hopes that, well, at least I could have this in a shoebox somewhere and, you know, look at them at some other point. But as I started doing this, I thought, you know, these images are really interesting. Salt water reacts to photography in very, very interesting ways. This particular image that you're looking at right there is almost, even though I have sort of enhanced it a little bit, exactly what the salt water did. It's a photograph of someone, I'm not really sure who it is, a friend of my parents, probably from the late 40s, sitting in his living room, and you can see his shoe and his arm resting there on the chair, and the radio in the background, and he's enveloped in this cloud. And this cloud is actually the salt water interacting with the photograph. And so all of these photographs were left like this. Actually, the ones that survived the best, see if anybody can guess it. Excuse me? Polaroid, absolutely. The Polaroids, almost all of them came through just fine, because they're like these sealed pockets, right, with the photograph inside, and so that was fine. The color photography fared the worst, and the color negatives were just colored mush, you know, and the black and white negatives did pretty well. I could actually reprint these things and probably come up with fairly decent photographs. So let me just give you a little bit of this. So you sort of navigate this space that you're in, and you say, well, what's going on here? Ah, wait a minute, there's a little color change there.
There wasn't anybody else.
Slip up under the shadow's embrace, lumbering along. Ask not whose. Pursued by secrets murmured up from hidden things long thought sunk into the years. History has left just a crease where the body was, a hollow wound folded into a shape, where the dark chapter worked its will.
So this particular work has, I think, 22 quick times that are buried in here somewhere. I'll show you one of my favorites here. Guess who that is? So this is the photograph in the background here, on the black and white photograph. It's 8mm film, though, from this period of time. And all my cousins and my sister, etc. It's 1957, doing a little bit of with the hula hoop.
Four thoughts, deeper than the shadows before them. Little crooked hands clutch up in the darkness and steal the light force back through the water's womb. This simple thing of skin, with the hide to surface separating water from reflection, is a riddle of more than just here and there, but older dimensions that have their own theater, more true and guided by an immense obscurity of will.
Okay, I don't want to go on too much more with this piece, but I think you can see right away my interest in multi-stream kinds of events, also an interest in poetry. I probably have been writing poetry my whole life. I can remember the first poem I ever wrote as a child. It was all about somebody getting hung or something. You know, it's like, you know. So I've really always written, and writing has been a way that I've also processed my ideas that have wound up as videos and performance work, but they've also wound up as part of my video work, my time-based work. I find that poetry to me is like it's sort of a shorthand or sort of a compression algorithm that condenses things, and it works really well for me in sort of, because I work poetically, I think visually as well. So I like things that are very condensed and very packed. So when I can stick, you know, words and images together, and then I'm really happy. So very happy with this piece, Dissolving. And you know, you say, well, okay, well, I'd love to do this with linear work. And video, because of its challenges sort of with resolution, always made, the more things you stuck in there, the harder it was to sort of, you know, make it work visually in a way that you really liked. But with HD, high def, excuse me, get out of here. With HD, high def, you can, well, I like to think of it as sort of the Louisiana Purchase for video artists. The territory is monstrous by comparison to what I sort of grew up with. You know, you can say, well, I can stick that over there, and wow, it still looks good. You know, you can stick this over there, and it also looks good. And you can orchestrate things in time. And so it's, I think, a really wonderful way to sort of take some of the interactive aspects that you find in interactive works and bring them into a non-interactive piece. In a certain sense, it does retain some of the interactive characteristics because the eye, you know, has to sort of make choices about where in this territory you're going to look and where your focus, your attention is going to be. And that, I think, is absolutely fascinating kind of issue to work with in high def. So what are the kind of things that make a difference in high def for artists? Scale, obviously. Having, I mean, I would love it, you know, if this was even larger. The size means something. Scale means something. Relativity, proximity, timing, motion, misdirection, saturation, and assumptions of continuity are all in the toolkit for time-based visualization. And they're particularly important, I think, for any work in high def. So I think what I'm going to do is shut up now and let you see a little bit of the work in progress, Archivist. And I'm going to warn you that I'm going to leave you out in the middle of space. In other words, this is fairly coherent, at least I think it is, for about 13 minutes. And then you're just going to drop off a cliff. So there's still about a third of it left to work on. But fortunately, I still have time left to do so. There's a cleaving among the houses. The creation of mansions of abuse, built with family stone itself, layer upon layer, and a history of folded things laid away. Embodied in the blood, settling in the dust, falling like time, in the mass graves of our best. sacrifice the children because we must. That is how it is passed on. Generation after generation, in the circle of things. The archivist's lens zooms back, focuses a flicker of the whole. There again, wrapped in spirals of intention, decisions are made. But where these images dissolve, what kind of history could exist? Even as this library decays, an old inherited imperialism coils on. Whispers urge the fingers, glide along the early days, hidden beyond the photographs and further than the tug of roots. Connection's easy ether twists and turns the knot, takes a drunken turn towards contradiction, admits its failure with the grisly communication of war. My friend asks, can't you give a little hope for the future? I say,
eyes like buttonholes. Sadism values violence. Violence fortifies the moral circle. Power distorts instinct. Fear governs rules. Immorality infects danger. Condemned atrocities control the social order. The imperative of war punishes us and them, benefits the elite. We must eliminate the moral panic now. There's a cleaving among the houses, a creation of mansions of abuse, built with family stone itself, layer upon layer, in a history of folded things laid away, embodied in the blood, settling in the dust. left time on the mass graves of our best. Sacrifice the children because we must. That is how it is passed on, generation after generation, in the circle of things.
It is a rough cut. Thank you. So I don't know whether there are any questions, but certainly welcome to attempt a response. Yes?
I'm curious about the title of the last piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's also very interesting with having the water dissolving.
Yeah.
You had to do, you talked
Well, it is an interactive event, yes.
dissolving at the archive, and yet you had the archivist.
Yes.
Is this between houses or above?
Among houses. Because cleaving has an interesting meaning. It both means to come together and also to come apart. So you have to decide what that's all about. So what you're interested in the title, like what? Well, the archivist. I mean, we're all archivists. I'm a collector of everything, but I think we're all archivists, especially in this era, as we collect images. We collect not only stuff from our lives, but just the consumption that we participate in the media is archiving at this sort of memory and psychic level, so that we're all products of this. It's turned us into all keepers of an archive, and that's how we communicate. We compare our archives, and sometimes they're very similar, and sometimes they're not. Cleaving among the houses is sort of the undercard for the archivist. And it just talks about, I guess, alludes to that which separates us and that which brings us together. Both of which could be good or bad, depending on what we're talking about. So that's kind of what that title's about. And where the video is going is towards the more personal, and then it's going to come back to the more collective sort of at the end, with a little bit of a tarump.
Okay, I was just wondering, as reference to your video, is the theme anti-violence, anti-war, or like?
Well, no, I think you're right. I think it's obviously a great part of it for me.
Then what was the symbolism of the ropes and knots? Because in the beginning the book was like zooming in on like knots and formations, and then.
Well, what do you think?
I don't know. I couldn't. With the title, there was cleaving of houses, the breaking up and coming together. It kind of was like a double meaning, knotting people together, but then you're tangled all together, and usually knots are frustrating and bothersome.
Well, I think that the knots are the conundrums that we create for ourselves internally as well as globally. I mean, Iraq is a conundrum. That's a knot, you know. So we can just, there's a litany of those that you can address. You know, I didn't try to address everything. I tried to address enough of it, and enough of it sort of in order, but sort of out of order too, because, you know, the way that our minds work, we don't necessarily, you know, go through the, you know, a linear process. You know, we sort of grab things from our archives in order to stick things together. That's important, that's important. I have a connection to this, that, and you put it together, and that's what your idea or your feeling, your emotion comes from. So, yeah, the knots are the things that there is will, I think, in the creation of a knot. But a knot, sometimes, if you're at least like me anyway, I get really frustrated at knots. You know, even shoelaces, you know. Tying is great. Untying late at night is hard sometimes, especially because I do double knots, you know, because that's why I don't have to tie them during the day. But at night, at like midnight, I'm going, what did I do? I created this like knot for myself to have to deal with. And I think that that is what we do on larger scales all the time. And how do you sort those things out? How do you untie? How do you even find out what are the components of the knot, let alone trying to solve issues of the knot? So that's what knots are for me, I guess, in this. Good question. Yeah.
It's interesting the way you're kind of the historical trajectory here, and you were talking about how just the technologies themselves have opened vast new terrains for you as an artist, and they also, the facility of those technologies is kind of giving everyone kind of that facility. So I wonder, kind of if that's a double edge, kind of how you see this impacting just general culture in terms of like the digital story production thing.
Yeah, my personal opinion is that the arts and the role of the artist is if we were to throw this ball out really far, the role of the artist is to eliminate their definition so that we are all functioning creatively. So, I mean, part, I think, of what an artist does is they model for the culture, you know, this is how you can put these things together. You can look at things this way, or you can look at things that way. And it's not so much, that's why I think all artists deserve respect, whether they're technically, you know, in the magazines, you know, good artists or bad artists, they all deserve respect because they're modeling for us ways in which we can imagine that things are or could be. And I think that if we do our job collectively, eventually, you know, it's a definition that doesn't apply because we're all leading our lives in a creative way with whatever tools we have in order to put that reality together for ourselves. And I think that's the magnificent sort of era that we're living in. We're seeing the beginnings of that happen in such a tangible way. Yes, we all could have gotten out pencil and paper and drawn, right? But it doesn't, I think, have the same impact as the kind of tools that we're dealing with now, because literally just the mundane, everyday communication skills that we all must exercise require very creative kinds of interactions, you know, with ourselves, to other selves, and also as a collective. Yes?
You sort of answered my question for me, but because I had my own ideas about the role of the train, but what were your ideas for it?
Well, I mean, I think that, I guess it's sort of history in a certain sense. I mean, that there's this omnipresent event that we may not, our attention may not focus on, but it's there and it's going all the time. And sort of the strategy in terms of the work is that, you know, it's sort of rumbling around in the background and kind of surfaces here and there and fragments of it are there. And then occasionally you get a nice burst of that just to remind you that, you know, that's the process is ongoing. And I love trains. Yeah, Tom. By the way, congratulations. Yeah.
As a 21st century artist, are you willing to talk about formal interest, beauty, formal beauty, which
Sure,
I see a
sure.
lot of there, and I don't hear artists talking about that as much, and yet when we see your piece, this is very accomplished formally and very beautiful, actually.
Thank you.
But I don't hear artists talking about that as much.
I'm more than happy to talk about it. I mean, I guess as a child, my whole interest in the arts were, if I could have verbalized it back then, were to make something beautiful. I have a much more kind of a broader view of what that means. In other words, what I think is beautiful. What I think is beautiful is getting at the essence of something. There's almost, the breadth of what I believe is beautiful is huge. What you see here is just a smattering, because I think I think the coherence of a work asks for a certain register to be struck, and if you move to a different work, you can strike another register. You can move around in that register, but you need to have some kind of coherence, or otherwise it just kind of trails off. So there's a distinctive sort of range that this particular work has. But I'm thrilled by beauty when I see it in the world, and I'm thrilled by the privilege of making what I think beauty is. And beauty for me is, there is nothing that isn't beautiful. It's a matter of our perception of it, which is the issue. And so, I can look at a linoleum floor with grease all over it and go, actually that's really quite interesting. Maybe I won't think that all the time, but I have that capacity. And I think Steve Bradley is now working for the Fulbright Commission, making decisions about what grad students are going to be going abroad on Fulbrights. I had that job prior to him. And I remember one session, you're locked in a room for 12 hours looking at all this work and whatever. And I came out of that. I'm in New York City, and everything I looked at looked like art. Everything. The garbage truck going by, the raindrops, the umbrellas, the puddle, the grease floating around. I'm going, amazing. And what you realize at moments like that, I realize it at other moments, but at moments like that, is that the experience of art has the capacity to tune us into a vision of the world that has we amplify our ability to make connections and to see the value and beauty in a myriad of things. So that, for me, is real beauty. And hopefully I'm a formalist, I think, in a very, very traditional one in many ways with regard to the way I like to visualize, and I enjoy it. It thrills me. I'm an old painter. That's where I started out, squishing this stuff around, And so to be able to do this electronically, to me is just, it's composing, it's music. It's both acoustical and visual. And so I approach it I think as a composer does. I think the language is the same. Yes?
You've mentioned a lot of ways in which new digital avenues have enabled you to express your art in new and different ways. Do you think that there are any manners in which these digital options have limited the...
Well, I think I alluded to that. I alluded to that a little bit when I talked about optics. And I think that if we wanted to sort of decode all the tools that we use, I think for all the wonderful things that they open up for us, they also limit things, because by the nature of anything that you invent, you have to say, I'm here and I'm not there, right? And anytime you're here and you're not there, then you're limiting those other places. So if you wanted to talk tool specific, then you could, then you could sort of go through what it is that that tool does and what it precludes. And I think when we invest so heavily in one, then I think it begins to have, culturally problematic issues. And this is why I think the whole issue of optics, which I do think is changing. I think the computer has really changed the way that optics, the monocularity of optics, have dominated our cultures for 500 years. I think that the computer is offering us a real way of changing that kind of perspective. Not that optics is, it's not like optics are bad. No, they're wonderful. They've done absolutely magnificent things for us. But at the same time, they also limit, they're always human-centered, eye-centered. They're eye-centered. I look at that this way, right? And it precludes thinking that others are looking as well, and that other things other than humans also look, and they look at things differently. So it creates, I think, a hierarchy that has both aided us, but also has done a disservice, particularly with regard to the environment. And I think that in the pieces that I showed that my wife and I are collaborating on, one of the strongest things that we're interested in is the fact that when we look at the environment, and that we've always, how do you participate in the environment? Well, we have ways of looking at the environment. And that's how we imagine it. And we conceive of strategies of how to deal with it because of the way we imagine it. And when we imagine it in these particular ways, then we have limited some other ways. And that's what we're trying to by using the same, this is the problem, right? How do you use the same tools? Your toolkit is only so broad to also expose the weaknesses of those very same tools, or to expand them. And so in doing some of the panoramas and using panorama software to stitch together images that are not shot from one point of view, really interesting and also very problematic, very hard. We failed a great deal in a lot of the things that we tried to do just because we were taking huge, 20 meters by 20 meter chunks of the Vought and photographing it very up close like that, and then trying to stitch these things together in big carpets, where you could sort of roam around in. It's hard to do because the software is all designed to say, I'm here, and I look here. So that's just one example. I got to tell a great story, though. Got to tell a great story. When I said that that the wireless was, I think one of the real profound watershed moments in history for us that we're still grappling with, because more than any other thing, it really touches on this separation of time and space, which is with us. We cope with that. We have to cope with that. We are coping with it, but we also notice that we're not doing a very good job at certain times. We say, oh my God, I haven't seen my, mother in a long time, because of, you think you do because you make phone calls, you do these things, but it's not quite the same, the management of all that. Great story about the early days of wireless. The invention of the wireless was sort of a very unheralded event because nobody said, it's not very glamorous. It's not like film. When film was made, everybody loved it. You could look at it and you could see the dancers and all of that stuff. But we had trouble sort of getting into the wireless. How do you back something you don't see? And it just puts data out, back and forth. The story that was the rage on both sides of the Atlantic, there was a man named Crippen who committed a murder in London, killed his wife. It's a grisly thing. The tabloid, would have been tabloid news, ran off with his secretary, and they are escaping to Canada, and they're on a boat in the middle of the Atlantic, escaping. And what happens is that the captain on the boat is wiring back to London. He says, I think there's a guy on this boat that fits the description of the murderer that you think you're talking about. And so their wireless is flying back and forth, but they arrange for his arrest on his arrival in Canada, and he is totally oblivious, you know, on his trip across the Atlantic, right? And yet it was in all the newspapers, so everybody is waiting for the ship to arrive in order to arrest this guy. And this spectacular event created real interest in the wireless and really promoted what becomes radio. Great story. I love it. Any other questions?
Please
Terrific.
join me in thanking John Sturgeon.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a small reception.
Oh,
so-
terrific.